So Dana White's Contender Series in 2023 is going to be taking place in about 6 weeks, and it's going to be a very, very good year in my opinion. I think we're going to get some really, really good prospects out of Dana White's Contender Series 2023, and if you're looking for Contender Series 2023 content, you have come to the right place. A few people do refer me as like a Dana White's Contender Series channel. Dana White's Contender Series is my specialty. I really like following prospects as they make their come up. I've got a lot of knowledge just in general of prospects and the fighters that are going to be on the card. And speaking of that, in this video I'm going to be talking about every single fight that is 100% official and is official enough to be on the Tapology page. And it's going to be good. There's a lot of really good fighters, a lot of really good prospects in these fights, and I'm going to be doing live streams for every single event as well. I'm going to be live streaming a fight companion to every single Contender Series event this year. It's going to be a good time. I'm really looking forward to it. And now let's start off with Contender Series 2023, week number 1, headlined by Kevin Borjas and Joshua Van. In my opinion, I think Joshua Van is the guy with all the upside on this card. If you look at Joshua Van, he's a young guy. He's 21 years old, and he's on a good win streak, and he's on a good win streak over good opponents, and he's finishing these guys. Like the Paris Moran fight, Paris Moran at that time was touted as a big prospect, and I believe he was the favorite to beat Van in that fight, and then he went out there and beat Cleveland McLean, and I believe Cleveland McLean was on a win streak when he fought Joshua Van as well. Now, Kevin Borjas, he's going to be a tough guy fighting out of Peru. I believe the UFC is trying to sign a lot of guys from Peru because recently they made a lot of signings from Peru. You know, Daniel Marcos was kind of the start, and then all of a sudden, Orlando Bedoya was signed. I believe they signed another guy from Peru. So you're going to see more fighters from Peru, I think, slowly enter the UFC over time. But I do think Joshua Van probably gets it done in that matchup. In the second fight, you've got Peyton Talbot taking on Junior Cortez. Junior Cortez is a wrestler, I believe. I'm like almost 100% sure that he is Tracy Cortez's brother. But I do believe Peyton Talbot should win this fight. I think he should win this fight by knockout as well. Now, I was watching actually Junior Cortez's fight against Elijah Smith live. And Elijah Smith was having a lot of success in that fight, but he managed to slow down. And Junior Cortez kind of decided to strike with him. And he wasn't really having that much success on the feet, where he is primarily a wrestler, is what I would say his skill set is. Now, Peyton Talbot is a guy that's going to want to strike. You know, he'd come out, I believe it was out of Uriah Faber's A1 Combat. He's beaten some good guys. He's knocked out some good guys. I think he knocks out Junior Cortez and gets a contract on the Contender Series this year. And Caio Machado versus Kevin Szyzewski. I mean, the UFC is so dry of heavyweight talent. They should just low-key, honestly, sign these two heavyweights and just have them debut against each other on an Apex Fight Night card, because the UFC needs heavyweights. They've only got like 30 heavyweights on their roster, and to make it even worse, it's not like there's a lot of heavyweights out there that they can just go out there and sign. So it's interesting that they're going to kill off one prospect to build up another in this matchup. I mean, I'm going to go with Kevin Szyzewski. I did a lot of research on this guy because he was meant to be on the Contender Series last year, and then he pulled out of the fight, and he's actually quite notorious for pulling out of fights and denying fights that he isn't favored to win. So maybe he could be a little bit of a headache for the UFC in the future, but I think he might be able to get it done over Machado. Machado's never really beaten anybody, you know what I mean? Like, he's got one good win in there, but I'm worried about that level of competition. At least Szyzewski has fought some good guys, despite what I just said. He is notorious for taking on guys that he is favored to fight. But we'll move on to the next week. Eduardo Moura versus Janina Silva is the current headliner, but I would be very surprised if George Hardwick versus Al Sawadi is not the headliner in this fight, because George Hardwick is probably one of the biggest name prospects that's not signed to the UFC, and he probably shouldn't be on the show. He should just be getting signed straight to the UFC, and he should be getting put on that July card in London. But here he is, he's going to be fighting on the Contender Series, and I feel like the UFC is kind of using Hardwick to build up the Contender Series, but also using the Contender Series to give George Hardwick a bigger name than just signing him and having him debut. At least with the Contender Series, more eyes can see him and more people can potentially be excited about him being there. And I think he does win this fight, man. George Hardwick is probably a guy that I think you will see a lot of in the future. I think this guy does have a lot of potential upside. He already has a lot of skills. You know, he completely outclassed Jan Lias in his last fight. And Jan Lias was 9-1 at the time. You know, he's been knocking out really good fighters, and he does love to go to the body. You know, he does love to go to the liver and that is something I like because I mean, when I'm boxing as well, if you guys don't know, I do a bit of boxing. I love to go to the body as well. So George Hardwick is a good fighter in my eyes. Now, Abdul Karim Al Salawadi, he's not a guy to count out, but George Hardwick really is the A side in this fight. He's fought good guys as well. But yeah, just not the same. It's not the same as Hardwick. I'm sorry to completely overlook him. But as for the other three fights, Haider Emil versus Emerson Mears, it's a fun fight. I mean, I'm not super hyped up on Haider Emil. I think he's a good fighter, but both guys are like old for prospect. Cameron Smotherman versus Charalampos Grigorou is another fun fight. I believe Cameron Smotherman has a lot of really high-level training with really good fighters, because when he was announced to be in the Contender Series, all sorts of UFC fighters went out there and said that he was deserving of the opportunity. And then for Eduarda Moura versus Janina Silva, I think Eduarda Moura does win that fight. She has the better record, but she doesn't just have the better record. Like, that's a terrible reason to pick someone, right? But she does have high level of competition, and she is a very good offensive grappler. I'm going to go with Moura, Smotherman, Haider Emil probably by decision in that fight, and George Hardwick by knockout. But these picks could change. These are picks without any research whatsoever. These are just picks with my knowledge that it is at the moment. I haven't watched any tape of these fighters yet. But this is gonna be, in my opinion, this is the card overall that's the best so far. Because at the top you got Isis Verbeek taking on Josephine Knutson, and that's a good fight. And the reason why that's a good fight is both of those girls are strikers, and both of them are world-class strikers. You know, I believe Josephine Knutson's a former kickboxing world champion, very, very good striker. And Edgar Chairez versus Felipe Dos Santos is gonna be a banger, man. Felipe Dos Santos is a mini Charles Oliveira. He is the flyweight Charles Oliveira, and this guy, honestly, I have never seen a boring Felipe Dos Santos fight, and I get excited every time this guy gets fights announced. I've actually been following his career for a while, for over a year now, when he took on this guy Marcos Digli, and then he took on this guy here, had a close fight, and then he took on Hugo Paiva, and again, had a close fight, which honestly you could argue went to Paiva there. But man, was it fun, dude. The way that Felipe Dos Santos fights, he's coming forward, he's throwing aggressive Muay Thai, he's just aggressive, man. He's a mini Charles Oliveira, dude. This guy, if he can get past Edgar Chairez, which is not going to be an easy task whatsoever, he really could become a big name in the flyweight division with how exciting his style is. He trains at a shoot box. He trains at a shoot box Diego Lima with Charles Oliveira, and he fights the exact same way. I really cannot emphasize it enough. They both fight the same way. If you like Charles Oliveira, you'll love this guy. If you've got the free time, watch Felipe Dos Santos versus Hugo Paiva. Such a fun fight. Really, really recommend it. You can find it on UFC Fight Pass somewhat easily. As for Edgar Chairez, this is his second Dana White's Contender Series opportunity. The first one he took on Clayton Carpenter. He took that fight on, I believe, very short notice. I believe it was only a couple, 2-3 weeks notice. And Carpenter did get by him. But man, Chairez did put up a good fight. You know, he slowed down towards the end, but it's because he's massive for 125 pounds. And he is a great fighter. And Clayton Carpenter's a great fighter too. You know, he won his UFC debut. He's beaten a couple of guys. That fight against Yanni Vasquez was a really controversial one, with the referee just let it go on for way too long, but I won't talk about that. We'll move on to Eli Aronov versus Zachary Reese. That's a banger fight. I believe Zachary Reese 5-0, 5 finishes in the first round. Eli Aronov 6-0, really good wrestler. Honestly, Eli Aronov come out of absolutely nowhere when he dominated Mariusz Kizakevich, and Mariusz Kizakevich has been on Dana White's Contender Series twice himself, in a win and in a loss. So Mariusz Kizakevich, definitely a good fighter, and we just saw Eli Aronov come out of absolutely nowhere and beat him up. And I think that he might be able to get past Zachary Reese here, because Zachary Reese, as I said, I believe he's 5-0, 5 finishes, which makes him a very exciting fighter to watch. He's not only just 5-0, 5 finishes, 4 of those fights have been won in the first 90 seconds. He's dominating everyone he's fighting. Is he fighting the best guys? Not necessarily, but this actually will be a very fun fight between two guys that really could get it done, but I think Aronov might get it done as the fight goes on. And then this is a very interesting fight that was announced today. Robbie Ring versus Luis Pujuelo. Luis Pujuelo was meant to fight somebody else from Sweden, which would have been a fun fight against Tobias Harila. But Tobias Harila can't get a visa. All sorts of drama going on there. But we get a fight. Luis Pujuelo still gets his Dana White's Contender Series opportunity. And Robbie Ring is a guy that completely went under my radar, man. When this fight was announced, I was like, Robbie Ring, I don't recognize that name, and it's because I didn't. I don't know how this guy went under my radar, like, at all. Especially with a win over Jacob Kilburn, because Jacob Kilburn, if you guys don't know, fought for the PFL, he's fought for the UFC, and everyone that Kilburn has lost to recently is in the UFC right now, or has been in the UFC at one point. And I think Robbie Ring, honestly, I haven't seen this guy's fight, so I can't actually make a comment on him, but it should be a banger fight just because all of the finishes that he's got. Pejuelo's a finish heavy guy as well. It's going to be interesting. Obviously, people are going with Pejuelo right now, but I personally might actually end up going with Ring. I'm going to have to look into it because, as I said, I don't actually know much about him at all. This next fight as well, I mean, this is Contender Series Week 4. Now we're going to be getting on pretty far away, so obviously there's a lot of fights not yet to be announced. But Carlos Prates taking on Mitch Ramirez. Both guys are good strikers. Prates is really, really dangerous. This guy's on a massive first round KO streak. Like, he's on a 3-fight first round KO streak, but he's on a big win streak by knockouts. You know what I mean? He's got a good win over Joseph Luciano. That win has aged pretty well, I believe. Yeah, Luciano just got a big win over Caleb Rideout. Maybe he even ends up on the Contender Series himself. But man, this is going to be a fun fight because Mitch Ramirez is also a good striker. And Ramirez was meant to be on the Ultimate Fighter Season 31. But obviously he was one of the guys that got kicked off from the show, even though he's going to be fighting at 170 pounds in this fight. He looked really, really good in his last fight. But man, I'm actually going to go with Prates by KO as my current pick. But that's not necessarily this might be a little bit of a controversial one, a little bit maybe of a potential underdog pick, as I really don't mind Dylan Salvador to win this fight either, but once again, it's a fight I'm going to have to look into more closer to the time. Now we move on to week number 5, Bruno Lopez versus Brenton Ribeiro. I'm going to be brutally honest with you guys. Brenton Ribeiro has been brought in to lose to Bruno Lopez and make Bruno Lopez 12-0, which is a pretty good record, right? He hasn't beaten the best guys in the world, but man, like he's looked good doing it. And Brenton Ribeiro 2-fight win streak, but it's kind of like, man, like at this point, it's just Lopez is the A side. Lopez is the guy the UFC wants to win. And the same thing can be said about Kevin Vallejos, who is 21 years old, very, very finish heavy, kind of like Esteban Ridovic, who was also a lightweight from Argentina. This is a featherweight fight. He's probably been brought in to beat Gene Silva and build up his record a little bit more. And the Tapology odds do reflect that. Now we move on to Eduardo Neves versus Jhonata Diniz. This is a fight I'm really looking forward to. Now, Eduardo Neves, infamously, I have used Eduardo Neves as an example multiple times because this guy, not even joking, fought on Dana White's Contender Series last year. Went out there against Michael Parkin and gassed out in 90 seconds and lost because he gassed out in 90 seconds. He threw everything he could in the first 90 seconds of the fight, was landing good shots on Parkin, and then he just gassed out. He literally gassed out in 90 seconds. I'm not even joking. And then Michael Parkin finished him because of it. It was quite hilarious. But now, Jhonata Diniz is not just your usual heavyweight prospect. You know, this guy's got glory kickboxing experience. He's going to be a good striker in the UFC if he can get past Eduardo Neves, who is going to swing heavy. This is going to be a banger for as long as it lasts. But because Jhonata Diniz is going to be the more technical striker, I am going to side with him to win this fight. It's going to be fun, though. It's going to be a really fun heavyweight fight. And this is another maybe example of heavyweight fights that should probably, both guys should have just been signed to the UFC and debut against each other. But at the end of the day, Shamil Gaziev is the guy that took the O from Kirill Kornilov. And a very close fight. Maybe Kirill Kornilov should be on Dana White's Contender Series himself. He's won a couple of times since then. And he's just won a couple of good wins. A win over Darko Stosic as well. Very, very good fighter, if I'm not mistaken. Darko Stosic had a KSW run, did he not? Or was it in the UFC? Let's have a gander. It was a KSW run and a UFC run. Look at that. Look at that. Off the top. Anyway, I'm just kidding. But Shamil Gaziev, 10-0 as a heavyweight. Legit heavyweight. I believe he's 32 years old. A lot of upside for him. Potential future ranked opponent. Potentially, if he can really make something happen, he really could make it up to the top 10. I'm genuinely not joking. If he can get past Greg Velasco easily and make a run, maybe beat a couple of guys at heavyweight, because as I said, Heavyweight is a shallow division. There's only 30 fighters on the UFC roster at heavyweight. So you only really need 1 or 2 good wins to be in contention for the top 15. It's not like lightweight and welterweight where there's like 80 fighters on the roster and the top 15 is only like the top, like 20% of the roster, if that. Whereas for heavyweight, the top 15 is the top 50% of the entire roster, right? So, yeah, I really think Shamil Gaziev can get something done here, and I think he can beat Greg Velasco and really make a big name for himself as a heavyweight contender for the future. Now, with that being said, that was a longer video than I planned, but I guess I really had to go over a lot of fights. Let me know what you think. As I said in the intro as well, I'm going to be doing live fight companions for every single Dana White's Contender Series event. Man, I'm really looking forward to the Contender Series this year. There's going to be some good prospects that come out of it. And with that, I will see you guys in the next one.